Gary Cahill won titles, but Gary Cahill, we're not having him in a team of the decade. Well, I'm sat here.
Last season he was extraordinary, probably the best season by a central defender we've ever seen.
Was it Willian?
I think it was Eden Hazard probably, wasn't it?
Well, Hazard had it.
Who was in the team, by the way.
I'm saving him to last.
Over the last 10 years, we've seen some amazing moments in the Premier League, brought to us by some incredible players. But who would make the league's team of the decade? We've assembled a think tank to address the issue. I'll start with you first, Neil. How's it going?
Not too bad. How are you?
I'm pretty good, actually. Not bad. And a debut for John Smith, our
Yeah.
Man City correspondent.
First appearance, looking forward to it.
How's it going?
Oh, good. Yeah, you?
I'm pretty good. I'm not bad. How are you doing, Pete?
I'm fine, thank you.
Are you ready for this?
Just about, yeah.
Do you want to get us started?
Right, yeah, what I will say is this has been more difficult to compile than it has been in previous decades, because through the 90s, through the 2000s, there was sort of 2 or 3 teams you could pick from. That was the Man United dynasty, there was an Arsenal dynasty, so you would get a clutch of maybe 7 or 8 players together and you think, right, that's fine, let's go for the core of the team can come from there. But this decade has been, you know, it's been a year or 2 for one team, a year or 2 for another. There's been no consecutive title winners until Pep Guardiola and Manchester City got involved. So it's been really difficult to find individuals and teams that have shone for, let's call them an era. So in that regard, you're kind of pulling players from all over the place.
If there's more of a balance throughout the decade rather than one team dominating, we've got more teams winning the league, more players with medals to give themselves a viable shout of being on this list. Let's start with goalkeepers. And who wants to throw a name into the mix?
The one I'd looked at on the list, De Gea would be the one that I would pick. Not necessarily in terms of achievement, not necessarily in terms of statistically or whatever else you want to go with, but in terms of performance levels, and I think he reached levels, out of all the names that you could consider, I think he reached the highest level out of all the players on that list. So I think if you think about as an opposition fan, opposition manager, opposition player, who's the goalkeeper that you'd be least wanting to face, I think De Gea would be the one, I'd say, over the last 10 years. Cech maybe would be the one who's achieved the most, maybe Joe Hart would have a shout in there as well, but I don't think they have performed as well for a sustained period of time as De Gea did.
I'd probably have to agree with that, yeah. I think over the decade, De Gea has been the most consistent, and I think he's possibly benefited from being a team who have faced more shots than anyone else. So that's to his advantage. But you look back over the sort of saves of the season for the past decade, he's probably pulled out more than anybody. So I think Joe Hart had a couple of good years where he was one of the best goalkeepers in the world, but he's not really maintained that. If you go back to some of those European nights at City or away at Barcelona, where Messi shook his hand because it was such a phenomenal display. But sort of the second half of the decade, he's really dropped off, and like Neil says, De Gea is the one who's maintained it.
Cost himself that place between the sticks. What do you think?
I think De Gea, yeah, I think he's been the highest level goalkeeper in the Premier League over the last decade, and I think he's been probably the consistent goalkeeper in the Premier League over the last decade. Dropped the odd clanger here and there for Spain and for Man United in that time, but I think when you even that out with the number of points, he's probably saved Man United. You know, with saves with his feet and things like that. I think he's made some real sort of gravity-defying saves for Man United at times, and I think, you know, and he's also won all the trophies in England, which is something that maybe would give you pause for thought, because it has been sort of a lost decade for Man United in many senses since Ferguson left, but he's still managed to be there, and he's won the Europa League as well. The only thing missing from his sort of medal collection in the club is Champions League. No fair of him getting that in Man United, but it just shows you that he's been there when it counts for Man United.
Might be worth mentioning some of the other people then, who, as you mentioned, Cech as well. I mean, more decorated than De Gea. Does he not have a shout, considering that?
I think he suffers maybe because his decade was probably 2005 to 2015. More, that would be sort of his peak decade.
Technicality.
Exactly. So when he set those clean sheets records under Jose Mourinho, for example, I mean, that's a long time ago now. I think he was very into the dog end of his career. You know, by the time he joined Arsenal, I don't think he pulled up any trees there either, really.
Okie dokie. So we're happy with David De Gea as a goalkeeper. So. I don't think we were really going to ever go any other direction there, were we? I don't think so. Let's move on to the defenders. We'll start with left back. I'm going to say some names. Ashley Cole, Leighton Baines.
I think we all found this a really difficult position to fill, and it's only when you go down through who you think, you know, belongs on the list in terms of what clubs they'd played for that you see that there aren't really a lot of outstanding candidates to the extent that I think Leighton Baines made my shortlist at one stage just because of his longevity, his consistency, his crossing ability, making assists as well. And then, you know, if you're going to put Leighton Baines, who's played for a fairly modest Everton team over the last decade, into the team of the decade, you think, then, you know, maybe it's slim pickings.
I mean, if you look at the City teams that have won the league, Kolarov, Clichy sort of split the duties. Fabian Delph played at left back a lot. Mendy had a spell. Zinchenko. They're not outstanding left backs. They're good left backs and obviously title winning left backs, but they're not sort of ones that you go, wow, they're as good as anyone in the world. So it hasn't been a glorious year at Liverpool. I mean, how long have Liverpool waited to find a left back? I mean, you know, since I was born. It's
a similar situation at a lot of clubs. You just haven't had one that they can slot in and say, okay, that's our left back.
Any names we've missed here, do you think?
Azpilicueta at Chelsea, he did well there as well. So, but again, there's no outstanding candidate, and I think Baines is as good a shout as anybody.
Azpilicueta was going to be my pick for this position.
Are we thinking? Are we putting left back or right back?
Left back. I'm going to do what Jose Mourinho did. I'm going to put Azpilicueta left back. Okay.
Well, that changes everything. Because now, if we're talking about Azpilicueta, then
he's played probably as good of a third of his Chelsea career probably at left back. And he's played in 3 different positions at Chelsea and won the title in 2 of those positions, one of which was left back. His natural position is probably right back, and then he plays at the right side of a back 3 under Antonio Conte and wins the title from there. So for me, I think if you're going to include Azpilicueta in the team as a right back or a centre back, you've got just as much cause to include him in the team as a left back. So
I agree with Azpilicueta because I think there's a strong candidate at right back which would take that position anyway. But I think if you add another year onto it, you could have Andy Robertson onto the list as a potentially a player for that, because I think the levels he's reached over the last 18 months, 2 years, are pretty high. And I mean, he's already won a Champions League. If he can add a couple more medals to his thing, he's still relatively young for a full-back as well. So hopefully, from his point of view and from Liverpool's point of view, we'll get a bit more of that. But it's not a golden bunch, is it, when you compare to sort of maybe the early part of the Premier League?
I have to be honest though, when we were going through those names, I was thinking, yeah, would you? I'd be pretty satisfied with Azpilicueta at left back. So he's nailed in.
Okay. Let's
flip sides. And you mentioned that you have a name in mind for the right-hand side.
Pablo Zabaleta would be the one that would instantly spring to mind for me, sort of linchpin of the City's sort of rise to prominence.
I think Zabaleta is one of those players who's maximised everything he can out of his career. I don't think there's any player, possibly out the whole side of the past decade, who's done more to take what he's got and transform it into deserving his place in a great City side. You know, when you go back to the 2012 title winning season, Micah Richards was the first choice, and he had a fantastic season. Towards the end of it, he got injured. Zabaleta stepped up, and that was it. He held that position for the next 6-7 years.
Let's move on to the centre backs. Go on, say some names.
Again, I think it's a difficult choice. There was no real dynastic team over the course of the decade.
Great word.
Thank you. So in that regard, the first name that I would throw out there is one who's been consistent across the decade and has won titles at different stages within the decade, no longer part of the Premier League, Vincent Kompany.
Oh, he's the obvious choice as far as I'm concerned. Won 4 titles, and you go back, you chart each one of those. Well, from the start of the decade, he made a contribution all the way through, up until his very last kick at the Etihad, that incredible goal against Leicester. He's done it all. He was a leader on the pitch, a fantastic defender, just an all-round, for me, the best defender in the Premier League for the past decade.
Is that potentially the easiest position on the list?
He's nailed in, isn't he? I mean, you look at key moments as well. He scored the win against United, the second penultimate game, was it, before the Aguero moment. He scored the winner of last season's title against Leicester, pretty much. Captain as well, so I wouldn't have any arguments with Kompany going in there. Especially again, another Mark Hughes signing. He's got a good claim on it. Signed as a holding midfielder as well.
He's going to love watching this video.
Yeah, he'd be definitely subscribing.
Who would you have standing next to
him? Virgil van Dijk. I would have as my partner for him. Yeah, the Footballer of the Year, the PFA Player of the Year, potentially the Ballon d'Or winner as a centre back. I think he's again, we're talking about levels, reaching peak levels. I look at some of the names on the list, and you've got Gary Cahill, who's won titles, but Gary Cahill, we're not having him in a team of the decade. While I'm sat here, you look at the classic centre backs of the previous decade who were on the wane in terms of Terry and Ferdinand and Vidic. Yeah, maybe you look
any of those. Because again, we're talking about these grey
Vidic would be the only one I would say as a shout for this era. I don't think we saw classic John Terry.
Is that then the case that maybe he's got an equal shout in terms of what you'd say Van Dijk has, considering his influence has only really been in the last sort of 18 months?
Yeah, but I mean, Van Dijk performed well at Southampton as well. You know, John Terry was going that way, Van Dijk was going that way. David Luiz, I don't think you can have David Luiz in unless you're playing 5 at the back, and
we're not.
Well, yeah, and it's for one game only. And there's not a great deal else. I mean, look at the struggles England have had trying to find a centre back, really.
Centre backs come and go, don't they? In the England team in the Premier League, who's regarded as the best, it kind of varies from season to season. Again, we've not really had that 10-year centre back other than Kompany, who you can point at and say he's definitely in the team. I maybe would have had John Terry in this team. Originally, I think I've been talked around to using Virgil van Dijk, but I think there is a case to be made for Terry in terms of the influence that he had at Chelsea, adapting to difficult circumstances at Chelsea at the time under different managers. You know, they were up and down a little bit, but I think his performance levels were really consistent until he started to age. So, look, Virgil van Dijk is probably the best defender the Premier League has ever seen.
What do you make of what Pete just said about him potentially being the best centre back the Premier League's ever seen?
Yeah, it's a good shout. I mean, last season he was extraordinary, probably the best season by a central defender we've ever seen. The problem for this list is that he's very late to it. You know, he had a couple of good years at Southampton and then this outstanding period at Liverpool. And John Terry maybe was slightly longer, slightly more successful in terms of, I think he won a couple of Premier Leagues, Champions League, so it's a really tough shout between the two. They're both good shouts. The thing is, Kompany did it for 10 years, and they've sort of bookended it either end of the decade. So,
and Kompany's unquestionable, whereas it is a bit grey here between Terry and Van Dijk.
The way I look at it is, would Liverpool be the team they are now if they didn't have Van Dijk in it? We saw how
Chelsea have been the team they were if they didn't have Terry.
Well, they were. They won a title, and he barely kicked a ball when Antonio Conte was there.
Well, would Liverpool swap Van Dijk for Terry?
In their prime?
Yeah. No, the Terry that we're talking about, the 10 to 15 Terry. No. Would Chelsea have swapped that Terry for Van Dijk? I think they probably would have.
I think they would have too.
Okay, so John Terry came and sort of flickered for a second, but I think that flame has died now. We're going to say that, and then we're going to go with Van Dijk and Kompany.
Well, I'd pick Van Dijk. I mean, I'm not denigrating Terry as a player or a team, but I would certainly pick Van Dijk.
I would probably have gone more for Terry, but I'm happy to be swayed on that one because Van Dijk is, he's going to be in the team of next decade maybe. Potentially.
So so that looks to me like we've got a Van Dijk and a Terry, and as a democracy does reign.
Van Dijk, isn't it?
Van Dijk, there we go. That is quite a back line. Not
many. Considering it was hard to pick, it's not a bad defence.
Okay, let's move on to the midfield.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, what formation are we playing? We've already established that we're playing 4 at the back.
4 at the back. I think sort of the story of the decade, I think, for the most successful teams is, well, I think of Antonio Conte, that was an outstanding team, and obviously they played 3-4-3 more or less. I don't think that was sort of the tactic of the decade, even though it was an interesting team to watch. When I think about the tactic of the decade, it's probably going to be 4-3-3. A lot of teams now play some sort of variation of that, including Liverpool, as they are at the minute. So I think most players on this list will be comfortable in performing in a 4-3-3.
And we're happy with that as a consensus?
Yeah, go with that.
Are you going to say your favourite player in the whole wide world, James Milner?
Milner's a shout. Obviously, I mean, the Champions League is sort of the cherry on top for his career. John will tell you that he played quite a significant part in their title wins as well, especially that second one under Manuel Pellegrini, where I think he played every position on the pitch at one stage during that season.
He did, but he was never really the first choice. That was his problem. He was jack of all trades, master of none, and he was always filling in. And if he filled in for Toure when Toure came back, Milner was out. When Navas, Navas was injured, Milner filled.
Yeah.
So he was never really the first choice, so he's not going to be the first choice for my team on this one.
Not the first choice of the team of the decade, even though they probably love him at Liverpool as well, I'm sure.
Yeah, he'd probably struggle to get in Liverpool's team of the decade. That's just his career sort of in a nutshell, isn't it? Where he'd be first sub for most of these kind of things, you know, because he can play 3 or 4 positions. But yeah, fantastic player. A few players like that, you know, I really admire the players who go on for a long time. Gareth Barry being another one.
This was a grafters 11.
Yeah, just
straight in.
Yeah, just players who, you know, you can't argue with 600 career games, and you know.
You mentioned James Milner, Man City. I am going to go to Man City for my first midfield.
Can I guess who it is?
No, it's my.
Oh, he doesn't want me to do it. Okay, go on in.
I think it'll be a unanimous shout. It's got to be Yaya Toure.
Obviously.
I don't think it'll be an unanimous shout, but I can't believe it'll be tough to argue against them, but I think there'll be a few Manchester City players that'll be up against them, which I think will make it not... Well, Kevin De Bruyne, David Silva are going to play in the same positions as Yaya Toure.
We could make a Man City 11 out of this though, really, couldn't we?
Yeah, you could. I mean, if you go my 3 midfielders of the decade, it'd be Kante, De Bruyne, and David Silva, and Yaya Toure would miss out, albeit Yaya Toure again probably had the most influence on a title win out of all of those City players.
It was a game-changing signing for Man City right in the early days of after they got their money, well, the relative early days after they got their money. And you look at that sort of first wave of signings, City, I don't think ever really matched that when they brought in Silva, Kompany and Toure over the course of...
Aguero, yeah.
And Aguero over the course of, 2 summers maybe. Maybe not Kompany, was a little bit before that, but over the course of 2 summers, you know, those were 10-year players that they signed. I mean, that was unbelievably good recruitment. And Yaya Toure, to be sort of extricated from a club like Barcelona, to take a punt on a team really who had never won a title, but he was convinced that they were going places, to give him his preferred position in the team. I thought that it was a risky move from Yaya Toure, but he really hit his mark.
I think he's only the second player, midfielder, to ever score more than 20 goals in a season, Lampard being the other one. And he was just outrageous that season. I mean, you look at some of the goals. If you want to look at a highlights package from Yaya Toure during his time at City, there's goals just outstanding, 20 yards. There was a run where he scored 4 free kicks on the bounce. Just putting them in the top corner, and he's just outstanding that season.
Remember his goal in the League Cup final against Sunderland, where he just sort of lolloped up to it and just stroked it from 30 yards into the top corner on over his shoulder almost. It's hard to argue against Yaya Toure because of how exceptional he was and sort of how frightening he was really as an opponent. You know, if you were coming up against him, you can have off days with any player, but there was sort of times when it didn't really matter what the other team wanted to do, because Yaya Toure could just decide. He was an unbelievable player. I just think Kevin De Bruyne is a better player.
But we've discussed this again as well, in terms of his decade, if we're looking at sort of the actual decade rather than sort of how a player's sort of peaks and troughs happen, can he say that he's got enough of it, as much of a shout as, say, David Silva or Yaya Toure?
Well, yeah. I mean, he's part of a 100-point title-winning side. He's, you know, an unbelievable footballer. I think he had a good shout to win the PFA Player of the Year. He lost out to an unusual season from Mohamed Salah in that regard. He's a treble winner. Made history that even as good as Yaya Toure was in his time, never achieved those things. You know, never hit those records, if you like. But yeah, you can make a case for either of them. Personally, I just prefer Kevin De Bruyne and think he's scaled slightly greater heights.
Okay, it's looking like we're not going to have a Man City. There's not going to be a whole Man City 3 in the middle, is it?
Well, no, because he did mention the battle for that sort of central position in the team. Neil mentioned the battle between Fernandinho and N'Golo Kante. Mm-hmm. Now, the one thing that I think that goes against Kante for that position in the team is that he's excelled sort of in a 2, because when he played for Leicester, he played in there with Danny Drinkwater. When he played with Chelsea and he won the title in there, he played with Nemanja Matic or Cesc Fabregas. He's very much part of a partnership, and I don't think we've got a partnership within this team. That said, I would have N'Golo Kante in this team all day long. I don't think there's been... you think about transformative signings. I know we spoke about Virgil van Dijk, but look at the recruitment that Leicester did when they brought in Riyad Mahrez for 600,000, and then they bring in N'Golo Kante for 4 odd million, put him in the middle of the team, and end up winning the league. Absolutely transformative signing. And if you look at his rise since he joined Leicester in 2015, he wins the Premier League title, then he wins the Premier League title again, Then he goes to the Euros, gets to the final all the way, and then he wins the World Cup in 2018. And he improves every team he goes on. And I know he hasn't had the full decade within the Premier League, but I just think that the Premier League has not had a midfielder like N'Golo Kante before. And for me, he's non-negotiable in this team.
What do we think of that, guys?
I mean, his impact was phenomenal, particularly Leicester. I mean, obviously, the most extraordinary title-winning season of the decade, and he was firmly part of that. And then to go from Chelsea, I mean, the season before, Chelsea were mid-table, weren't they?
Yeah, it was the season Mourinho was sacked, wasn't it?
Gus Hiddink ended up managing at the end of that season, wasn't it?
But Kante seemed to transform them and turn them into title winners. So those two seasons are absolutely outstanding. I'm not sure a couple of seasons after that, either side of that, how good he's been.
I mean, Fernandinho is the other name you mentioned. It's sort of an either-or there. Granted, Fernandinho has been an incredible player in the Premier League.
Yeah, I think those are the two outstanding candidates for defensive midfield. Fernandinho's been less high profile, but I think I would tend to go along with Pete and Neil that for the impact, that to have that much impact as a defensive midfielder, he probably just about gets it. Yeah.
So looks like we've got 2 of our 3 midfielders nailed in.
So we've gone with Yaya, have we?
Yaya and Kante.
Yaya and Kante so far.
Now I think we're going to get. We're going to get
one space left.
We're going to get agreement on this though. It's David Silva.
It has to be David Silva.
Has to be.
That's quick, wasn't
No, I mean, it just has to be because he's probably the best player that's been in the Premier League over the last 10 years. Probably, he's got to be City's greatest ever player. The only rival he's got is probably the guy we're going to talk about as the centre forward. But he's probably the best player over 2010 to 2020 in the Premier League. He's still going now, still going strong, still unbelievable to watch.
Sometimes I think about David Silva and I wonder if there's any of the players that Pep Guardiola managed at any of his other clubs that might have made it into his first Barcelona team. And the only one I think that could even come close to getting into that team would be David Silva. The problem sometimes for David Silva, and John, you might agree with me here, is that because he plays for Manchester City, he doesn't get the same type of, I suppose, widespread worldwide notice that a Liverpool player gets or a Man United or even an Arsenal player gets. It's like, even though they're winning titles every second year throughout the decade, they're still somehow underrated. And I think David Silva maybe suffers a little bit from that.
He's not interested in doing any sort of media stuff. He likes to turn up, be brilliant, and go home. That's all he's interested in, and that's what he's done for 10 years.
It's not a bad philosophy towards life, is it?
He'd be the new Paul Scholes. I think when he's gone and when he's retired, I think people will start coming out and you'll start hearing the post-career sort of eulogies towards David Silva, I'm sure.
Okay, cool. That was pretty unanimous, that one, actually.
Probably him and Kompany are probably and De Gea are the least argumentative elements of this team.
I'd say, yeah. Well, there might be another one in the next line of the formation.
Okay.
Get to the forwards. And we've got 3 to put in here.
So we've got 2 wide men and a centre forward, yeah?
Are we happy with that, guys?
Yeah.
2 wide men and a forward? Okay.
There's no argument over the striker, is there?
I mean, can there be? I mean, is there anyone else? And we haven't even said his name yet.
No, well.
Yeah, it has to be Aguero, doesn't it? It's just so consistent. I mean, you look at his figures, I think he's 20 plus goals in 6 out of 7 seasons. He's had his injuries, puts up with it and just bangs in another 20 goals anyway.
What I love about Aguero as well is that he was set a challenge by Pep Guardiola once Guardiola went into the club. So he'd already, he'd won titles, and an underrated Man City team was the partnership. That team that had a partnership between him and Dzeko at one stage. But he's had to play in a completely different way in order to impress Guardiola. Maybe he was coasting a little bit when Guardiola got there. They brought in Gabriel Jesus, set that challenge for him. If you want to stay in this team every week, you're going to have to go to another level in terms of your work rate, your link-up play, but you're going to have to maintain your standard in front of goals as well. And he's hit the mark every single time.
You don't see City every summer being linked with the world's best striker, do you? You don't see they're going to buy Mbappe, they're going to buy whoever, because they've already got the world's best striker, or one of the world's best strikers there. There's always 2 strikers I always think of in the all-time Premier League, and I think of Shearer and I think of Henry. They're the 2 that I would always place on the thing. No one will do more than Shearer probably in terms of goals, but he's done more than Henry in terms of achievements, and he'll probably surpass him in terms of Premier League goals as well. I think he's only about 10 behind him at the moment, isn't he? Now is the highest scoring foreigner in Premier League history. You also think of the moments and the moment. That is the defining moment of the last 10 years in the Premier League, and it was him, and it was the 94th minute.
We do have other names to mention. I don't think Drogba. I think Drogba had his moment obviously in the Champions League final against Bayern, but I think his Chelsea career had kind of gone off the rails a little bit. That's it. He wasn't playing all the time. He wasn't scoring all the time. Rooney is probably worth a mention just from the sheer number of games that he's played, and obviously the number of goals that go along with that. Luis Suarez is worth a mention. Did he play long enough in the league to merit a place on this list?
Well, 2011 to 2014, probably not in terms of overall, but again levels. I mean, he's reached the highest level of any Liverpool player that I've seen. I include Salah, I include Van Dijk and Mane in that 2013-14 season when obviously Aguero's City beat Liverpool to the title. I mean, he's 31 goals in 33 games. I think there was a spell, I think before Christmas, I think he had 14 in 7. And before the start of that, he just seemed to get a hat-trick every week. He was remarkable. And that was sort of after the summer where he'd wanted to leave and there was all this talk about he'd been banned for biting and these kind of things, and he came back and he won Footballer of the Year and PFA Player of the Year, which tells you a lot about.
Sort of the first
he missed the first 5 games, and incredibly he never got a red card in his Liverpool career, but I think he missed about 20 games due to suspension. He never missed a game through injury. He was always there. But Kane, another one as well. He hasn't won the Premier League, but you look at
half his goals are penalties though, so that would really
rule him.
I mean, again, we're talking about time frame.
Yeah, he's in the right time frame.
Yeah, 14.
Yeah, he started getting into the Spurs team on a regular basis right at the start of Pochettino's reign. And what I do like about Kane is that he wasn't an obvious talent. It's not like the first time you see Kylian Mbappe and you think, what have we got here? And it's akin to that effect where you saw Jonah Lomu for the first time in the Rugby World Cup in 1995. That's the Mbappe effect. Kane wasn't like that. He's had to almost construct his own career from very modest raw material. And to become England captain and score so many goals at the highest level, I think is a mark of the man. And I've got the height of admiration for Kane. But in a team like this where I've got Aguero as my centre forward, Kane's not going to do it for me, I'm afraid.
Vardy at Chelsea, Leicester had an unbelievable season. Same with Mahrez as a right side. Vardy, I think, would be an underrated shout for doing over sort of 5 years.
When I was sketching out my team, Vardy was in it. I'll be honest.
Okay.
I think the effect that he had, I think he set the Premier League record at the time, scoring 9 consecutive games in a row. That gave Leicester the sort of pre-Christmas momentum they needed to go towards the top of the league. And he scored big goals at big times during that season. But like Neil said, he's been doing it since.
Well, I think Vardy suffers because he's a bit unfashionable, isn't he? He's come through the lower leagues and he had that one season less to win it. But like Peter says, he's done it consistently. He's doing it now. I think if we're going to play a 4-3-3, maybe he's a shout for a wide position.
I would say I'd like to find a place for Vardy in my team.
So we'll have him rest in there for now, shall we?
He's kind of there.
Just leave him there until we maybe find out otherwise when we start to get to more of the wide players. Maybe.
Well, we could talk through some of the genuine wide players. I think Mohamed Salah is worth a shout. I mean, that first season alone at Liverpool was one of the greatest individual seasons that Liverpool have had out of any player in the Premier League era. I think Riyad Mahrez for what he did at Leicester and then winning a title again for Man City last season. Gareth Bale had his spell. Raheem Sterling had his spell, not only at Liverpool but also at Manchester City. I think Pedro Rodriguez for me is an underrated shout for this. Very, very easy for him to come to a club like Chelsea after doing it all and winning it all at Barcelona and think, I'll pick up my checks here for the next few years. But he's not done that.
Has he not seriously declined in that time?
No. Under Antonio Conte, he went to another level under Conte to win that title. I think Rodriguez.
Who was on the other flank?
Was it Willian?
I think it was Eden Hazard, probably, wasn't it?
Well, Hazard
who was in the team, by the way.
I'm saving him to last.
There's no argument that he's in, is there?
Eden Hazard?
Yeah.
No argument?
I don't think so. I think it's got to be a Hazard.
Okay, so...
You couldn't wait to mention him, Neil. Come on, talk about him.
You can't start talking about Pedro as a player of the decade in this environment.
No, I was just giving you an alley-oop there.
I was saving Hazard for last. Pedro was one of my contenders, but he wasn't actually in my team. Look, it's there in black and white.
Pedro's not in the team, but you will have Hazard.
Yeah, I think he consistently, non-Manchester City, he's the best player I've seen come to Anfield over the last few years, and the one player guaranteed to terrify opposition fans. Bale had that, but Hazard won titles, Player of the Year, outstanding. Especially the last 2 titles that Chelsea won. I think the Mourinho one and the Conte one. I think you can't sniff at those. And great player, great footballer, and left the Premier League as a Premier League legend.
I think the mark of the man is that a manager like Antonio Conte, who's you know, he's such a disciplinarian when it comes to how he constructs his teams. He actually, you know, he shifted that team around to go 3 at the back, 4 in midfield, 3 up front in order to accommodate the talents of Hazard better. And it's not every player in the world that Conte will look at and think, okay, you're my attacker and I'll make these concessions for you. But the reason he put Marcos Alonso on that side of the Chelsea attack, or of the Chelsea flank, was to make sure that when Hazard had the ball at his feet, he only had one opponent to beat. He could go by him and either shoot or make an assist. That was one of the highest levels from an individual, title-winning individual player that I've ever seen from Eden Hazard that year. And, you know, he does it under a different manager like Jose Mourinho as well. I think it's phenomenal player, and as Neil says, probably the most talented individual that has been in the Premier League. And
there were times when he would come to the Etihad and Chelsea were up against it, and he was the outball, and so strong, beat 3 players, and all of a sudden you've conceded a goal, and it's all through Hazard. That's how influential he was.
That sounds like it's nailed in.
Yeah, so I think Aguero and Hazard are nailed.
Hazard from the left.
We've still got Vardy resting.
For me, Sterling is the player who takes the other position, because I don't think there's possibly anyone else throughout the team who's made the improvements that he has. He's just on an upward curve, and he's playing better than ever right at this moment. And it was difficult for him when he first arrived at City, but he's just got better and better. Now he's one of the first names on the team sheet, one of the first names on Pep's team sheet. And fully deserves it. He's got everything about his game. One of the criticisms was that he didn't score goals. That's no longer even a debate now. He's starting to do it for England as well. So for me, he takes the other position.
Well, there we go. Looks like we have an 11. And we're happy with that, are we? We're all happy with that?
I don't think the case that John makes for Raheem Sterling is justified. And I'm more than happy to see Jamie Vardy's place in the team. In this instance, to Raheem Sterling. Phenomenal player, made huge improvements in his game under Pep Guardiola, added goals to his game. For me, Sterling is merits inclusion in the team of the decade.
I think a lot of people would have said when he went to City, £50 million, you know, come back in a couple of years and we'll see how good a deal that was. And look at it now. Look, well, what would you sell him for now? Well, you wouldn't, but what would you sell him for now? It wouldn't be £50 million.
So we have an 11. Let's just recap from the back. We've got David De Gea between sticks. Yeah. Centre backs, we have
Vincent Kompany and Virgil van Dijk.
Yep, solid pair in there. Azpilicueta and Zabaleta. I just like saying that. That's really fun to say. And in the middle, we've got Yaya Toure. Of midfield, we've got Yaya Toure, David Silva, and
N'Golo
Kante. Again, very solid. And up front, Aguero, not Vardy.
Not Vardy, unfortunately.
Not Pedro.
No, not Pedro, surprisingly
Pedro's
enough.
not in the team.
Did it just come to you in the moment? Was that what it was?
No, I think, honestly, we're spending too much time talking about players. And the other position in the team, Raheem Sterling.
Raheem Sterling, very justified, I think, his inclusion. I think that was fun. Thank you very much for coming, guys. Thanks, Neil.
No problem.
What a lovely debut.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Pete. And thank you for watching. What do you think? Do you agree with what our panel have selected? Are there any names we missed? Is there anyone who shouldn't be in? Let us know. And thanks for watching. Bye-bye.